Okay, wonderful. So I know that there's some stuff in the chat, which we'll get to as well. Can I just do a sweep of the room just to get an idea of how many questions or comments we have? If anyone wants to give me a wave. Okay, cool. I'm sure we'll pick it up from there. So I'm going to start online and then I'll come to you, come back online, and then we'll see where we're up to. So I've got a question here in the chat for Sam. So Marina says, how can we utilize PMS to combat the patriarchal assumption of the male body as the norm? Big question. You might need to just come over towards the microphone if that's okay, to make sure everyone can hear.
Yes, so the question is probably according to the PMS as the answer to patriarchy, and I think I rather do not mean it as like to combat the male body as the norm, but rather than like if we are upset or tend to be more upset during PMS or tend to feel like not that resilience in this time, that a clear saying no to something could kind of stop patriarchal exploitation, for example, and to not get this anger about, or for me personally, I often feel like questioning myself a lot during PMS, and to kind of stop to internalization these PMS symptoms rather than to put it out to the toxic society where we are living, kind of. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I love Sarah Ahmed's quote in Living a Feminist Life. It's about breaking the grammar of patriarchy.
Yes.
I think that's what you're doing. Yeah, cool. So I promise to come back into the room. So yes.
Yeah, I'm interested in the embodiment practice thing of it, and I'm sort of anyone who feels to answer it, but Laura and Marlo particularly, it's like we have a lived emotional experience of the menstrual cycle, and how do you quantify and show research about that side of it, which is our lived experience? It's just fundamental. We're talking all about the structures and the language around it, but how do we support the individual to, like you were talking about, you know, like to listen to themselves and hear their truth and navigate this change into sustainable living that we want to achieve, that we're reaching towards? So psychological embodiment. Who wants to talk about that?
I mean, I'm on to.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Can you come closer to the microphone? Sorry, just not got the best setup. You just need to stand in this general area.
I think on an individual level, it's my experience is that when you get people to cycle track, for example, you can't cycle track if you're on this high-paced train through life, you know. So in order to do that, you need to take a moment, ideally every day, to kind of just take a deep breath and like, how am I feeling, both physically, mentally, energetically? And that's something that's really difficult because it's just a lot of us don't do that. And I think all that comes down to is that connection to our body, where what are the practices and the tools that might help you to just tune in with your body again. And for some people that's breathing, for some people that's yoga, for some people it's listening to sound or music. I was just talking to someone before that when we do a training and we introduce the idea of cycle tracking, 100% of the people understand the importance of it from an even a health advocacy perspective. And it takes us 10 interactions with people until they start tracking, because we're just not used to doing something every day, and especially not over a longer period of time. And then people come back to me and say, oh, I really hacked this because I'm now doing it every time I go to the toilet. I'm like, great, well, at least you found a time to do it. But it's weird that we're programmed in a way that our self-care, and it's weird that we even have to call it self-care, but the moment we take to invest into that connection with our body takes place in like the 2 minutes we also go to the toilet, right? So it's really about reestablishing those, and we knew how to do that, right? We heard that from Laura as well. Like we were once in tune with our body, and it would crave the type of foods that we would need, and that's what we would give it. And this idea of keeping your womb warm during menstruation, now we all just crave sugars and fat, and we don't know what our body needs. So it takes a lot of effort and intent, I think, to kind of lean back into the fact that we're cyclical beings, and not just the menstrual cycle, like the seasons or circadian rhythm, the moon cycle, like all these things, and restore that kind of connection with our body.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone else from the panel wanted to jump on that. Punch you in a second. I just wanted to, on that theme of embodiment and empowerment, especially because it struck me very, when you were talking about, you know, the fact that empowerment looks really different in that colonial or post-colonial setting. So I was just wondering if you might want to talk about that different type of empowerment, but also that different type of embodiment that might come through. If that's, yeah, if you don't mind. Sorry. And I'll...
Yeah, I think what's important is, first of all, reconciling with the fact that this is the reality and that our lives have consistently been juxtaposed against something, against an ideal, because in the absence of that reckoning, then there's almost this gaslighting of people's lived experiences and the fact that they feel as though what is being communicated to them does not relate to them or is not something that is contextually sound for their communities and all of that stuff. I think when it comes to empowerment in particular, we still center empowerment around kind of meeting the bottom dollar and being able to be a productive member of society as it pertains to larger global capitalist functioning, so on and so forth. And so I think the question really has to be, what does empowerment mean within community, and is never going to be an individualized project. So a lot of that embodiment involves having those conversations and opening up those space for those conversations, but also realizing our positionality as we are opening up those conversations. Because I think sometimes with menstrual health work, people will enter specific communities. I myself, for example, can go into a community, but I do have privilege. Like I didn't grow up in kind of the remote areas of my home country, so on and so forth. And so it's really being dialectical and iterative in a lot of these things and realizing that it's not an end point, but empowerment in and of itself is a project or something that is continuous over time, and it's not going to be achieved just in one go or something that can be quantified in basic monitoring and evaluation practices. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's really important. I think something that ties all of the discussion in this panel together is, you know, it's not a thing that we can solve in one cycle or one event. It's, you know, constant and ongoing. So we have a question over here. Please do come up.
I'm just wondering about your thoughts about we have this recognition that the cycle can be really helpful in many ways, but I think we have this movement also against the cycle with cycle suppression, and I think here in this discussion we're assuming that women have a cycle, but like we have a lot of women who take the pill. We know it's not a real cycle, which is also another discussion, or who just simply don't want to have their period anymore. So I think, how do we include also that part of the menstrual experience, because it's also a menstrual experience in itself? So any thoughts on that?
Great question. Anybody have any thoughts they want to share on that one?
Yes, I would not speak about just experiences, because I've done talks for men and for trans people that maybe not aligned with the traditional menstruation. But again, women who are post-menopause, who might not have connected to their cycle when they were having it. So I think if you remove that aspect of like menstruation and turn it into the cyclical being, so like you mentioned with the seasons and the moon, and appreciate that wherever you are, whether you're cycling or not, you are a cyclical being living in a very non-cyclical supported world. So if you take the actual bleed elements away, but connect to the idea of you are cycling and you are a cyclical.
But then it's as relevant.
Yeah, but so if you're on the pill, it's like
you're
you're still cycling, you're just not bleeding.
Yeah.
So you take that element away, you're still in the ebbs and the flows of the cyclical nature, I guess.
Yes, but that would be as relevant for me.
Yeah.
So it's more like about cyclical living.
Yeah,
We take the gender elements.
100%. Yeah, and the age, and again,
Yeah.
what like saying in other countries where they might not have the privilege to connect to their cycles in the same way.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, I think Per's daughter described it very well. She kind of puts it that everything related to menstruation is set up upcycle norm. If you are menstruating or if you are not menstruating, so there's always this othering perspective, and that's also, I think, the problem with the female as a cycle, the cycle as a female superpower, because it also creates an additional thing.
Exactly.
So, and I think we have to break with all of these narratives of menstruation associated to a gender.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to come back to some questions in the chat for a moment. So I have a question for Laura from Marina. So is this spiritual practice part of any indigenous religious practices, or has it something that's come up more recently?
Indeed, several indigenous traditions did it. Even women in ancient Europe did it as well. In the Middle Ages, erased that from ancient Europe, which is why I mentioned that it was done in different parts of the world. Many offering practices in indigenous traditions include the offering of blood. In the case of menstruating women or menstruating people, their blood is the vehicle of offering. So I think that in the colonial practice, that's why we do that, because it's like a decolonizing the practices that we learned, that how to be related with the menstruation. So I think that is the important thing, because you can decolonize how you relate with the menstrual blood, not in the hygienic ways, so besides in the empowerment ways.